Right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to our podcast called Perfectly Human, where we aim to help you feel that we are all connected, that you are not alone in the challenges that you experience, and whatever you are experiencing is perfectly human. So today's podcast, I'm one of your hosts, Rekha and Angie.
Hi.
Hi, Angie. And today we're going to be discussing anxiety. So today's podcast is called Curiosity Killed Anxiety, and we're going to describe and talk a bit more about that. We'll be looking at the impacts of anxiety. We'll be looking at how we may experience it and what we can do about it.
Yes. So like last time, we've chosen a playful sort of title. So curiosity didn't kill the cat, curiosity killed anxiety. And I hope that by the end of today, you will know why we are saying that. But basically, to start with, to kick it all off, much like we were saying last time, we wanted to talk first of all about why we have chosen this topic, right, Rekha?
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why we've chosen this topic is because many people actually do go through some sort of anxiety, and we lots of times don't feel comfortable talking about it. Yes. Yes, we may have experienced different levels of anxiety, or actually not even know that it was anxiety, what we were experiencing. And lots of times we actually see it affecting our performance, we may also not know how to deal with it. So we hope that today is going to allow us to touch on a few of these subjects. And as usual, you have seen the first episode now. We are more than happy to read your comments. Please leave any comments. Go ahead and discuss with us, please. Yes. But yes, Rekha, so tell me what is anxiety? We start from there.
That's a big question, isn't it? Well, before we go to what is anxiety, I think what's really interesting is, according to the World Health Organization, I think it's something like 264 million individuals worldwide suffer with anxiety disorder. And interestingly enough, it's actually more common in women than men, which is something that I don't know why that surprised me, but I don't know whether that's also because sometimes men don't want to accept or admit it. And so that was interesting. And I guess I'm also
that
guessing.
surprised me too. When we were preparing for this episode and you said that, I felt that I would have never guessed that one gender would be more than the other, actually.
Yeah, me
Yes.
neither. And I'm also guessing that the number that, the World Health Organization has, it's probably larger than that, because I think a lot of people may not really talk about it or know that they are struggling with anxiety, which kind of, brings us on to what is anxiety. So, I mean, I guess, in the purest definition of it, which I found on, I think it's Wikipedia or something, is that it's a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease about something with an uncertain outcome. Which I am sure that, we've all experienced at some point in our life, and we kind of experience that and we move on from it. However, the challenge here is that if it continues for too long, right? If we experience anxiety for kind of like either it's reoccurring or it's sustaining, and it starts to impact our happiness, our performance, and our relationships. And so, and Angie, I think you can talk to this a bit more, is that, there are, I guess, different levels of anxiety. So it might be useful to kind of talk a bit about that.
Yes, and I think you've said it well, because what was coming through again when I was doing sort of the research and looking at framing the conversation was it's very related with the amount of anxiety that we are feeling. So anxiety per se is not really a bad emotion. It's just an emotion, basically. We probably talk about sort of three levels of anxiety. The first one would be sort of everyday anxiety. Anxiety is part of our survival kit as humans, basically. So sort of fear, anxiety, there are some emotions that are helping us be ready, for potential situations. As you said, anxiety is very related to uncertainty.
Mm,
Um, so your everyday anxiety would help you sort of get ready to react to anything that can be thrown in your way. And from that perspective, that is a good level of anxiety, if we want to call it good, let's say. The second level of anxiety we will be looking at is a little bit more like persistent anxiety. So we go again to that concept of how much anxiety am I feeling. So this should be the good anxiety should be something that switches on and then switches off, basically. Here you are potentially already starting to experience kind of lingering a little bit around, actually. And that takes us to the next level, which is, we've called it debilitating anxiety, which is where actually you probably can look at a lot of symptoms coming up, either physically or mentally. Could be things like you are not able to sleep because you keep on thinking, you are anxious about not having a solution for something, or not knowing what happens tomorrow, what's going to happen in my job. COVID has been a fantastic example of anxiety, and I think that one of the reasons why we chose this topic is because coming out of the last years, we have also sort of personal experiences um,
mm,
with anxiety. But I would say, to sort of wrap up this point about the levels of anxiety, I will say there's a lot of information online. Of course, we were not looking at it today from the perspective of sort of more clinical side of things, like clinical anxiety disorders, because we don't really come from the neurology side of things.
yeah,
But people can sort of look online at information, and you can look at what are the symptoms, how do I know that I have anxiety. We wanted to sort of focus more on these three levels, and how is anxiety sort of coming up in conversations for us,
yeah.
basically.
So just to summarize, Angie, what you're saying is there's a kind of so level one would be like everyday anxiety, and then kind of moving from so that would be kind of it, kind of you experience it, but then it moves on, passes through you like most emotions, like
Yes.
happiness, sadness, and that kind of thing. And then level two would be persistent anxiety. And then level three, what you're saying is like debilitating anxiety, where, it kind of gets in the way of your everyday functioning, really. And I guess what we're looking at today is the maybe level one, level two
Yes.
for today's conversation. And you just mentioned like, where does anxiety come up? The other day, I was on a call with a client, and I just asked her, "How are you doing?" And she was like, "I'm feeling really anxious today." And then we started having a conversation about it. But it's really interesting because I think with coaching conversations, anxiety comes up in a number of different ways. It's like if we've got too many things that we're dealing with, so too many
Mhm.
balls in the air, and having
Yes.
to focus on one area. And as opposed to focusing on another, and how do we make that choice, thinking about where we are spending energy and our time. And the most common thing we hear is that, oh, I don't have enough time.
Mm,
And actually it's shifting that mindset, so it's not about the time, it's where you're focusing your energy and your attention.
mhm.
Also, I think a lot of people, we want to control everything, and when something's not in our control,
Yes.
that tends to cause anxiety. So you were talking about COVID. I think so many people felt really out of control with that. So dealing with uncertainty and not being able to control it. And I think the other thing also is, some people get anxiety around having difficult conversations,
Yeah.
around, saying the tough stuff. So those are, I guess, some common things that I come across.
Even things like choices and decision making,
Yeah.
it brings a lot of anxiety as well, because one is always left thinking, oh, I need to make a decision here, I'm going to choose this, I'm not choosing that. So what would
Mm.
have happened if I chosen that, instead
I
of this?
wish I had a crystal ball and then I can see into the future.
Exactly, that
Yeah,
is that level of uncertainty, isn't it?
yeah,
But I
exactly.
think that what is quite common, Reka, and I don't know if you agree with me, is that in a lot of these conversations, we are not naming it. We are not actually saying, oh, that is anxiety. You're like, the person may not say, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Or
Right.
sometimes when we say I'm feeling anxious, I'm not sure we are fully aware that actually we are feeling anxiety. Does it make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. But you were saying during the pandemic, you felt a lot of
Yes.
anxiety.
I realized this is when anxiety really came to the forefront for me. Because I think that lots of times we also feel we are not justified to have anxiety because it's like, okay, I have a good life. I don't know, I have a good job. I have my family. I have, yes, I have different roles and all of that, but somehow I shouldn't feel stressed, let's say, or I shouldn't feel
Mm.
um, but as a coach, definitely I relate to many of these conversations. And during the pandemic, I realized at some point in time, I named it. I was able to say, wow, I am actually feeling anxiety about the pandemic. Um, and yeah, that made me reflect and made me realize this is perfectly normal to
Mm.
feel this emotion actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I know
interesting.
also that tell us a bit more about your own experience. I know that you have also sometimes struggled with anxiety.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Which I guess, is a reason that I thought I was quite keen to talk about it today. Because I think for approximately 7 years now, I've struggled on and off with anxiety. I get really bad phases and then it calms down. And then, so it's been a bit like this for a number
Mhm.
of years for me. But I remember the first time I had, it wasn't the first anxiety attack, but I think this was a really quite bad anxiety attack. And I didn't know what it was. And honestly, it felt like I was having a heart attack. And the challenge at that time was that I was traveling. So I was abroad and it really freaks me out. And so when I got back home, I actually went to the doctor and I thought I was having, you know, heart issues because my family has a long history of cardiac problems and high blood pressure. So I went to the doctor expecting him to do an ECG and some blood tests, but he looked at me and he was like, "I don't think you have heart issues, Rekha." And I was like, "Oh." He was like, I think you've got anxiety." And I looked at him, I was like, "No way." I was like, "Don't be silly." Yeah, it was a bit like, "Don't be silly. Of course I don't suffer from anxiety." And he just said to me, he said, "Look, why don't I give you a very low dose of Xanax, take it
Mm,
for 2 weeks and
mm.
see if it stops?" Because
Yes,
what was happening prior to that, every night I was kind of waking up in this state of panic and I didn't know why. Yeah, my doctor was a wise man at the time because I'm sure he still is a wise man, but he was
yes,
right. It was anxiety, and I was a bit thrown back because I was like, as you said, that shouldn't be happening to me.
yes,
And I guess for me, this was like the kind of level 2, like persistent anxiety.
yes. And to be honest, it sounds very scary. Like to feel that you may be having a heart attack. That sounds like super scary.
Yeah, it
But
was scary.
I love what you're saying because somehow you've gone to the doctor and you're somehow expecting that the doctor tells you something like it's physical. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
totally physical. It's like your body is playing up or whatever. And then actually, your doctor is telling you maybe something emotional, not physical. And then you're like, oh wow, so you're a bit kind of thrown in a different direction. Tell me, why do you think you were reluctant to accept that this was anxiety?
I think I felt quite a lot of shame around it actually, and I felt like I was failing because it's that thing you said earlier that I shouldn't be feeling like that. I help other people feel better, and why am I feeling like that? And on the surface of it, my life wasn't stressful,
Mm,
and I don't know. I should be able to handle it. So I think it's two
mm,
things:
mm.
shame and just feeling like I was failing. And so, yeah, but I think once I realized that that's what it was, it helped me. talk about it in a bit more openness, I think.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was also thinking that, we have talked sometimes between ourselves about that toxic positivity as well. That
Yeah.
we also live in a world where, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to think about what we should be grateful for. But then at the same time, that sometimes can take it to a level where you feel that you cannot be anything other than grateful, and that stress should not exist. And if you have, a good job and a good family, as we were saying, like,
Yeah.
there is that kind of level of expectation. And I think that, yes, sometimes we expect of ourselves things that are completely unrealistic, or irrational, basically.
Yeah.
Tell me, so I was also wondering, once you accepted that this actually was anxiety, what did you do next?
Yeah, because I didn't really want to go on any medication long term. So I actually went to see a therapist because I think consciously I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know where something triggered something for me, and I
Mm,
didn't know what was going on. So, I think so. I went to see a therapist just to find out what was going on at a subconscious level that made me then deal with that, because obviously something had been triggered, and it was really, in a way, a
mm,
useful a useful way for me to kind of deal with things that I wasn't consciously aware of, and that really helped. And so it wasn't what yeah, it was things that it was kind of the things that were happening in my life. It wasn't about that. It was things that I kind of tucked away
mm,
nice
mm.
and neatly and didn't really want to look at. So yeah.
Yes, because normally when we are just being kind of in our conscious, we tend to push it.
Yeah.
Like, especially things like stress or anxiety, we go like, oh, no, I'm not
Yeah.
stressed, or it's not anxiety. It's like, it must be something else. As you're saying, we tend to think, oh, it must be something that is going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But something is kind of triggering it. So I get what you're saying. And I think therapy obviously is so valuable for so
Mm,
many things, in so many aspects of our lives, of course. So
yeah.
tell me something else. So we've just mentioned a little bit earlier as well, like about realizing or understanding that we are experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
So in my case, for instance, I think that what was going on in the environment, that we were all in lockdown, and we have been persistently in lockdown for a while. Um, the disease was completely uncertain. It was pretty scary. I mean, now, looking back, it kind of sounds a little bit different.
Yeah.
Of course, we've done well with vaccination and some things, but it was
Mm,
pretty uncertain. So I think for me, it was more of a conscious reflection, like sitting down and thinking about it. In your
mm,
case, it was more of a physical event almost.
yeah.
Tell me. Mm,
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing to think about, I guess what it makes me think, our bodies are amazing at telling us things that we may not be seeing. And I think often we don't listen
yeah.
to our bodies enough. Um, so yeah, I think it was more of a physical event that made me then go and seek some help. But I think the thing that's really useful is being able to name it,
Mm,
and knowing that it's okay. And it's really interesting because once I started talking about it, a lot more people started talking about it to me as well. So I wrote
yes.
an article about it not long ago, and I got so many messages saying, "Oh, I've been experiencing that, and this is happening." So I think let's talk about it. There's so much literature out there that can help you identify if you've got anxiety or not. And we are going to put some links
Mm,
in the comments below to help you with that. And I think, what might be really useful is to talk about, what are some ways of managing and dealing with anxiety. And so some ideas, I think the first thing is really just to acknowledge and accept it. I
yes.
think that's the first step with anything. I think that's really important.
Yes, as
And
we
talk
were
about it.
saying, not to try
Yeah.
to push it
push
away
it away.
or
It will
deny
just
it.
come
Yes.
back. It will come back, and it will come back fiercer and more difficult than it was the first time. So I think, talk about it as well with your support network, whether that's friends or at work. And some of the things that help me, especially if I'm going through quite a bad patch, is exercise really
Mm,
helps. I think just physically moving can really help. And I know it sounds basic, but breathing, and I think we underestimate the
mm,
power of breathing, and just taking, some deep breaths can really help. So even things like mindfulness and meditation really helps. Something that my therapist taught me, and I think has been wonderful, is just practicing what she calls emotional regulation. So
mhm,
it's basically, a couple of times a day, thinking, how am I feeling right now in this moment? It can be positive or negative, but just how am I feeling right now? And where do I feel it in my body?
mm.
And then asking myself, what do I need now? What do I need is quite different to what do I do? Because often what I realize is what I do is sometimes numb it out. So I'll numb it with watching Netflix, or even if it's listening to a podcast. I'm not really
Escapism.
dealing. Yeah, escapism, and whether it's having a glass of wine, or you know what I mean. I'm not dealing with
Yes.
it. So what do I need? And that could be something really simple, as just taking a few deep breaths, getting some fresh air, talking to my friend about what's bothering me. And so
Mm,
that was really important. I think the other thing that's really useful is, if you are experiencing anxiety, is to reduce alcohol and caffeine.
mm. Yeah.
And often it's the other way around. We turn to alcohol because we're we're
Yes.
anxious, and I would say don't do that. So yeah, and don't feel afraid of getting help
Yeah.
if you're feeling too overwhelmed with it. I would
Yes.
really encourage that.
I'm a big believer of getting professional help in
Yeah.
whatever you need in life, basically.
Yes.
Like lots
I,
of people go like, oh, I'll do it alone, or and it's like, okay, fine. Like we can do some things alone, but it's also important in life to recognize when we can benefit from
yeah.
extra help or professional help.
Yeah. I'm
So,
getting much
yes.
better at that, actually.
Sorry,
Sorry.
come back.
I interrupted you. I'm just saying I'm getting better at doing that, asking for help. It doesn't come easy for me.
As it doesn't for many people, because, and actually, that's what I was going to say, that there's always this kind of shame underlying anxiety, right?
Mm,
I think that talking about it, some people feel that it's a bit like, oh, I'm not handling things properly. But
yeah.
and we have always seen it, and I think that we wanted to bring it to an end, looking also at anxiety in a completely different way. So not looking at anxiety as something seen as negative, but something that can be also be seen as positive, basically. And in this sense, we go back to that element of anxiety is there to help us. Okay, it's innate to us. And I'll give you a good example. There's this book actually, which is called Good Anxiety by Dr. Wendy Suzuki. She's a neuroscientist, actually. So she talks about changing it as a powerful asset and how
Mm,
you can use your anxiety. So, for instance, if you find yourself thinking about something, you don't have a solution, you're trying to figure something out, you can always come and do a to-do list. So transform that energy from a kind of like negative energy into putting it into some positive sort of outcome that
mm,
is coming out of that energy. But I also like that she talks about it as looking at it as a gift, as something
mm,
that is giving you information,
yeah.
and giving you indication, looking at it from a curiosity perspective, like
Yeah.
what is going on, like what is this telling me, let's say, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, and I think that's where, being curious about it can really be powerful, which is what I ended up doing. Um, Instead of just taking medication, I got curious about what is it telling me, where is it coming from. So, in my case, curiosity really did kill my anxiety. That doesn't
Fantastic.
mean it doesn't come back, but it does.
Well, again,
So
like as
yeah,
we're saying, there's no need to push it away. It's part of
yeah.
our life.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was very interesting. And
Yeah.
the next episode, what are we going to talk about?
Before we go there, what I wanted to
Yes.
say is we're going to put a link to that book you talked about, which
Yes.
was, what is it called? Good Anxiety?
Good anxiety. Yes.
Good Anxiety by Dr. Wendy Suzuki. So we're going to put a link to that book into the comments as well, because I think that's a really useful mind shift. And the next session, as you said, Angie, shall I share that? You ready? Yeah? Ready to
Yes.
do that? Okay, cool. So our next session, or not session, next episode, I should say, we'll be focusing on toxic relationships. And the reason we're doing that is, especially coming up to the Christmas period, you know, we always think that Christmas is time for us to get together and it's exciting, but actually sometimes it can be really challenging, you know, especially when you're going back to visit family and friends that you've not seen for a while. And it can be a challenging period. So we're going to be looking and exploring toxic relationships.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so on that note, I hope that you found this episode useful and resourceful. And we, as usual, we want you to know that you are perfectly human, just the way you are. Thank you so much. Bye.